Joining us online, one of the most effective conservative activists in the country, Robby Starbuck. He's a documentary filmmaker and popular political commentator out of Tennessee. And now he's been waging an ongoing campaign against corporate DEI programs, most recently successfully with regard to Lowe's. Robby, thanks so much for joining the show. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too, Ben. Thank you so much.
So, Robby, this is really impressive. You targeted Lowe's over their DEI programs, and they preemptively issued a letter to you basically dismantling all of them. Why don't you explain what you saw there that sort of got you exercised in the first place, and then what their response was?
Well, in general, with all these corporations, especially ones that rely on the conservative consumer, what we're seeing a lot is policies that divide people across identity politics lines. And it really just divides the workplace and pits people against each other into pools of being an oppressor or oppressed. And it's kind of funny, like if you look at the only groups who do not have ERGs, which are these micro employee groups where they've all got kind of their own vendettas that have to do with their identity politics, the only ones that don't have any groups are Christians and white people generally and Jews. Those seem to be the only groups that are not allowed to have an ERG. Everybody else is allowed to have one. But they celebrate all these radical pride events, and they're doing things that explicitly go and sexualize kids by funding these pride parades, pride events where kids are present. And I think that's something that's diametrically opposed to the values of most Lowe's customers. But that's what we found in the case of almost every single one of these companies that we have exposed recently.
So what do you think is driving all of this? Because obviously you're totally correct that there are a ton of companies whose chief consumers are obviously conservative, and yet they've been eaten up by this entire ideology, and only when called on it publicly do they back off of it.
I think the important thing for people to realize is, I'm not just this incredibly effective activist. The truth is this was always a house of cards. Somebody just had to press the cards, because this whole ideology is built off of essentially the premise that they want to control people's thoughts. I think that's really what it comes down to, because Democrats can't come out and outright admit, hey, we want a communist country where we have total control. They can't do that. That's optically a really stupid move, and they understand that. So what they figured out quite effectively is if you can control the ideology of corporate America and education, you control the ideology of the country. And it was built essentially with the premise that if we can't get you on our side, we're going to make you feel like you have to be silent. And that's exactly what they did very effectively through these corporate maneuvers. Because if you were sort of in that group where you would say, okay, you're part of the wrong think, you've been effectively told by your workplace you can't get a promotion, you're probably going to be fired if you step out of line. But everybody else who is in alignment with the ideology, you're going to be promoted, you're going to be rewarded for going ahead and continuing the progress behind this movement. So I've seen DEI not just as, this terribly racist, divisive program, but to be perfectly honest with you, I think it's much deeper than that. This is a Trojan horse for leftism being able to take over the entire country. And it's part and parcel with what we see happening in academia, because most of this stuff was driven in after George Floyd by radicals that were essentially trained Marxists pushed out of the universities. And so they immediately come into corporate America, and what was their job? It was to spread a virus, and it was this woke mind virus, and they did it very effectively. And the bosses were entirely captured, because CEOs, most of the time, they're not true believers. These are people who just essentially did not want to be called racist and didn't want to lose their jobs, and they wanted to continue with the power that they had. And the best way to do that after George Floyd was just sit down, shut up, and allow these radicals to do whatever they wanted. But we've now experienced 4 years of that. And I think most people in corporate America have been through enough of these trainings where, honestly, if we're being intellectually honest, people would rather have a colonoscopy than do these. They're really degrading in many ways and condescending, but these people have realized, okay, you know what? This is not what we thought we were signing up for. And so I think in many cases, these executives are happy to have an excuse to go backwards, because the right has done a very bad job at making it apparent to these companies that there is this opposing force. And the truth is, the dumbest thing we've ever done on the right is embrace the idea of being a silent majority. Silent majorities lose. They allow a very vocal minority to take over everything and ideologically begin to run the entire country. So we can never allow that again. And we should never be proud of that phrase, silent majority. We need to be a very loud majority that makes our values clear and fights for our ground. If we don't, our kids are going to inherit a country where they cannot have opposing thought on any issue.
Folks, using the internet without ExpressVPN, it's like going to a public bathroom and not closing the door. Weird. Don't do it. You're letting too much data out there. Did you know that your internet service provider like AT&T or Verizon knows every single website you visit? Even worse, they can legally sell that information to ad companies and tech giants who use that data to target you. ExpressVPN puts a stop to all of this. It creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so your online activity can't be seen by anyone. I use ExpressVPN on all my devices. It works on everything, phones, laptops, routers. Everyone who shares your Wi-Fi can still be protected even if they don't have ExpressVPN. The best part is, using ExpressVPN is as easy as closing the bathroom door. You just fire up that app, you click one button, and now you're protected. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by CNET, The Verge, and countless others. So, if you're like me and you believe that your online activity is your business, secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show. By visiting my special link, you'll get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN service for free. Who doesn't like to save money, right? Again, that's expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show. expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show to protect your data today. That's expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show. You're totally right, Robby. I mean, this is the thing that the left has done better than anything else, is they've allowed conservatives to believe that they have a moral superiority simply by quote unquote being nice. That if conservatives are nice, this is what makes conservatives good. Well, no, actually, our values are not good because we are quote unquote nice. Our values are good because they're good. And so the basic idea that we are supposed to sit there and allow all of these corporations to be captured by insane leftist vocal minorities who have made their voices heard not just with regard to these corporations directly internally, but also major stockholders in these corporations. Many of these are publicly traded corporations. You have groups like BlackRock that have signed on board to do all this sort of stuff, and they were captured. And then those investors speak to the CEOs of these companies. As you say, CEOs are just risk averse. It's not about whether CEOs are pro-capitalism or anti. They're just risk averse. Their incentive structures are to avoid controversy. And when you create controversy on the other side, they want to avoid that controversy too.
That's exactly right, Ben. And I think, a lot of these CEOs, they're in this moment now where they're realizing, okay, DEI didn't do what was promised because McKinsey promised all these companies it's going to make you rich. It was BS. And everybody knows it was BS now because you can look at every metric that there is to measure this, and it has failed miserably. It's not only divided the workplaces, but like, for instance, in London on their stock exchange, they have a diversity ETF. It has underperformed every other index fund, and it's not even funny. Like it actually is kind of funny. It's very clear that this is monetarily a terrible decision. And then behaviorally within your workplace, it's just going to divide people and make them hate each other. I can't tell you the number of messages I've gotten from people that are just like, thank you. I've wanted to do this, that, and the other thing. I cannot speak up because I know exactly what will happen. I've seen other people speak out against these ideologies and they've been fired instantly. But to your point about conservatives essentially having a weakness and cowardice problem, we need to incite courage in people to do the right thing, because I can tell you right now, I've also received a couple of emails where people have been like, hey, Robby, I really appreciate what you're doing. This is big. I'm such a big fan of it. However, I think you should be nicer to these companies. I think that after they make the changes here, you shouldn't tout these wins and take a victory lap. And I have to make it explicitly clear. The people who are behind this ideology understand one thing and one thing only, and it's ferocity. You have to show your teeth and show that you're willing to bite, and you do have to take a victory lap. It's the only thing they understand. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we lived in a world where we could be nice and we could just elect people who are always nice, and that was it. But the truth is, when you're facing down radicals and people who want to destroy your country, I'm telling you as somebody who's the son of a family that had to flee communism in Cuba, you have to be willing to show your teeth, and you have to be able to fight for victory, total victory. If you don't, you're going to lose your country.
Well, Robby, maybe take a moment and discuss what happened with Harley-Davidson, because it's a very similar story. You went after Harley-Davidson. You pointed out that virtually all of their customers are going to be on the middle of the road to right side of the aisle. They also caved like a house of cards.
Yeah, and they are one exception to what I was talking about, where CEOs don't tend to be true believers. Their CEO, Joshin Zeitz, he is a far left radical. This guy founded what's called the B Team with Sir Richard Branson. The B Team's explicit purpose is to push leftism, progressive politics throughout all global corporations. They have something that they call, we have to replace the who to change the how. And what that means to them is essentially they want to eliminate former leaders who are just focused on making money and replace them with social activists. And that is their explicit purpose as an organization. They have endorsed the craziest policies you can possibly conceive of. They were big fans of Target allowing grown men to follow little girls into the public restroom. I mean, things that just are beyond the pale in America that we understand very clearly to be wrong. They were behind 100% of the way. They've engaged in climate activism and everything you can really think of that is kind of grotesque for a company to get involved in, and kind of ironic if you think about like Harley-Davidson. What makes them Harley-Davidson is the sound of the bike, right? They had a plan to turn Harleys all electric by 2030. Anybody who understands the brand understands why that's a very weird idea. It seems like somebody who was more focused on selling an ideology than selling a product. And that's ultimately not how capitalism is supposed to work. And so I think that what we did was a very simple premise. All we have to do is inform customers, because what I've said for the entirety of this campaign that we're doing is companies did this on the premise that their customers are stupid. If we're being really honest, that's where it started. Is they said, we have this presumption of stupidity. We don't think our customers are smart enough to figure out what we're doing right under their nose. And I operate from a different vantage point, which is that if you give people information, people are actually kind of smart, and if you give them the information and you describe it well enough, people are going to use the actions within their control to do something. And for most people, that's using their wallet as a weapon. And people have done that quite effectively. And for Harley-Davidson, one of my favorite things about our campaign against them was that it lined up with Sturgis, the biggest biker rally there was. And it was a ghost town at Sturgis. In fact, Bloomberg reported that Harley had to pull their tents down 2 days early because they were so embarrassed by the turnout. And so it was quite apparent to Harley's leadership that this is not going away. This guy's a dog with a bone. He's going to keep releasing embarrassing stuff day after day after day. We've got to make a change. And so it was important to us because, to be perfectly candid, and I wouldn't admit this during the campaign, I did not think Harley was going to go backwards. I was hoping they would, but because the CEO is a true believer, I just didn't think it was going to happen. But we were able to force that to that point, which tells me our movement has legs and is a powerful force to be reckoned with in corporate America.
That's Robby Starbuck. He's doing an extraordinary job with his activism. Robby, thanks for what you're doing and really appreciate the hard work.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for everything you're doing, too.
Are you tired of the lies and the twist of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.